Welcome back. It is the Flow Sports Hour on Flow FM. Sarah Loh, the new CEO of Softball Australia, joins the show. Sarah, it's great to have you here. Thanks very much for joining me. How are you?
I'm really good, Sam. How about yourself?
Yeah, very well, thank you. I really appreciate you giving us your time today. So, Sarah, how are you finding the new role? Obviously, you've been the CEO now for only a couple of months. You're still pretty new to the role, and it's been a pretty hectic couple of months for you, I'm sure. So, yeah, how's it all going so far?
It's going really well, thanks, Dan. I'm entering into week 10 this week, so I've been touring the country and meeting all our softball states and staff and presidents and boards and players, and it's just been... I said to someone the other day, I've never been made to feel more welcomed ever before in any other sport, and I've been in the industry for over 3 decades. So I'm not just saying that. The people have been very welcoming, really quite interested in my philosophy about grassroots participation, which I think has gone down really well across the country to have that focus.
And just for a bit more background on you, Sarah, before you got the role as the CEO of Softball Australia, were you heavily involved in softball, or had you been more around other sports and, learning the ropes of sport in general before moving to softball?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, this is my, giving away my age now, Dan, but it's my 35th year in the sport industry. So I started as an 18-year-old, so I've completely given away my age now. But I've run regional sports, 2 state sporting organisations, a big regional football league in Victoria, which is the biggest independent junior football in the country, and that's in AFL. And then, of course, now into softball. So I didn't have a background. I remember just having a hit like most young girls when, you're in primary school or high school. And I don't even think I had a hit. It was probably more throwing and catching the ball. And the people in Adelaide really ran me through their paces a few weeks ago when we were at the Masters Games, down at West Beach, and they got me to do the first pitch of the game, which was a bit nerve-wracking, and then they put me in the batting cages, which was actually a lot of fun.
That's great. And like I said, it's been a hectic couple of months for you, I'm sure. Obviously, you got the role, and one of the first things that happened was the announcement that softball would be an Olympic sport from 2028 and hopefully onwards. So starting out at the LA Olympics, what's the job been like following that announcement? I'm sure it's been really busy, and that's kept you working really hard in your first 10 weeks.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of reflect on that period because that was only about 2 weeks ago that announcement came through via the International Olympic Committee. And, prior to that, I reflect on the amount of people asking me, Sarah, are we going to get in the Olympics? And, it's completely out of our control in relation to that. It has everything to do with the International Olympic Committee and the host city being LA. And even though we can imagine that, in LA that baseball and softball is absolutely massive and the home of those 2 games, you never quite can guess because it all depends. It's a numbers game and how many athletes are allowed to be there. But as soon as that announcement came through on that Monday night, we were celebrating pretty hard. And the next day flew up to Sydney to go to the Australian Olympic Committee's office to do a big media call out. And we had all the 5 sports, or technical 6 sports, because they like to put baseball and softball together. But all the CEOs and the representatives of the players were there. And you've just never seen so many, smiles on faces of those sports who are returning, like baseball and softball. And then, of course, the new sports that are getting a look in for the first time.
I'll ask you more about the place that the game is in regionally in a moment, because obviously from your background, I'm sure you'll have plenty to add on that. And obviously in the new role as well, I'm sure you're working hard in that space. But now that you are in the role of CEO of Softball Australia, what sort of a place do you think the sport is in Australia-wide? Obviously, it's a really exciting time following the Olympics announcement, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of efforts to ramp up the participation in the sport and trying to get plenty of our players to the top level. So, yeah, hopefully everything's in a pretty positive place.
Yes, really exciting times for softball. And, we've got a new 5-year, strategic plan that literally got released during the period of time I was getting interviewed. And, now that I've had my head wrapped around it, really the key things are what we call people, playing, promoting and performing. So it really has that entire gamut where we're looking at grassroots and making sure that the sport is strong from the grassroots. And we're not just talking about, obviously, junior participation, getting a lot of numbers in from that area, but making sure we've got enough volunteers in umpiring and coaching, which is really the lifeline of our sport, and making sure that we can support the clubs who really, again, are at the coalface, bringing in this junior development through there so that we can actually get them through the pathway. So if people want to continue on the community pathway, there's something that they can do all the way through to Masters, or if they're a bit, they've got the dream and the vision to progress a little bit higher, we can now dream about the Olympics in 2028. So I think the sport's in an excellent position now. It's been in and out of Olympics, which makes it a little bit challenging. But the growth in the numbers now are starting to really improve. And we want to see those highlights of when we were, maybe triple the numbers of where we were before. So a lot of work to do, but I'm really confident with the people that we have on the ground that we can really build that vision for people to come back and play the game.
It is a really exciting time for the sport. And like you said, the Olympics, they're just 5 years away, which is plenty of time still for us to prepare and put together a strong team to represent the green and gold at the Olympics. Obviously, that's 5 years away. The strategic 5-year plan, which you just mentioned, was released sort of right before you were into the job. So you've inherited that responsibility of implementing that plan and making it all work. So how's that process all going in its very, very earliest days?
Yeah, look, the beauty is that the organisation has really taken the entire country, like the key member states and territories, through that particular process. So everyone's had an involvement, and what I'm loving and hearing is the fact that everyone agrees that while there is this aspiration to be successful at the highest level, when we're in and out of Olympics, that's been the World Cup. And, we had amazing success last year with our men's Steelers team of being the world champions in December. And that didn't get a bit of enough of a radar, in my opinion. And we have the women's team, our Spirit team, who punched their ticket to the World Cup in July next year. So hopefully it's as big as the Matildas in the FIFA World Cup come July next year. But that is literally 5 days out before Paris Olympics. And we're not in the Olympics next year. But that World Cup in Italy is really the start of the planning for LA 2028. And then hopefully everything goes well with the local organising committee for Brisbane that can see us be in the Brisbane Olympics in 2032. That's just going to set up the sport moving forward for long-term success.
Well, you mentioned the Matildas there, and you're certainly right. When Australia are good at something on an international scale, the country want to get behind them. So hopefully that competition right before the Paris Olympics really puts the sport on the radar, and then it will just be 4 years until it is included at the LA Olympics. So it's a really exciting opportunity. There's no doubt about that. And the men's and the women's teams are both doing really well, which is really exciting. I want to talk more about the senior level teams, but before I do, I want to ask you more about the game at a grassroots level. Is that something you're really targeting in this 5-year plan? And what sort of outcomes are you looking for if it is something that you're targeting over the next 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. We're targeting this, and one of the major reasons I was recruited by the board was my experience from the grassroots perspective. So I mentioned before, I actually ran the biggest junior independent football league in the country with a fraction over 12,000 players, 3,500 games a year. So it was absolutely massive. And that had nothing to do with seniors. It was a purely just junior league. So the senior competition and even the AFL, relies on a really strong, what I call a large fat bottom pyramid, which is the base of the pyramid needs to be very, very large to feed into the top level, which is less than 1% of most sports, which is the elite level. So really for me to focus and talk about only Olympics and World Cups and things like that would be remiss not to have a really big strategy based on the grassroots participation. So in this 5 years and really for the next 10 years and beyond, the strategy is completely all about grassroots. And it's really pleasing for me to know that the board and the rest of the country are completely on on this strategy with us and with me. So this whole tour I've done around the country, that's all I've talked about. I haven't talked about elite because we have funding there through the government and we've got an excellent elite high performance program. And what we need to do is to make sure that those opportunities exist at the community grassroots participation, which improves health and fitness, social connection and mental wellbeing outcomes. But for the more talented young kids who want to aspire for the ultimate success, there's that secondary pathway. So it is very much on the radar of the board and the organisation, and not just from Softball Australia, right across the country. Like everywhere I go, Dan, everyone's saying, hallelujah, thank goodness. What do we need to do, Sarah? We're right behind you when it comes to grassroots. But again, there's challenges there because, you know, the drop in participation and volunteerism is big, and it's not just in our sport, it's sport across the country. So there's a lot of compliance when it comes to integrity and the legalities of, you know, operating a sports business nowadays. So we just got to make sure as an organisation that my eye is firmly on volunteerism and supporting the clubs to make sure that they can be sustainable.
That's such an exciting answer because you couldn't be more right. It's all well and good if you're doing well at the pro level in any sport, but if there's nothing happening at the grassroots level, those pros sort of age out of the game and then there's nothing left behind. So it's so important to pump up the grassroots level of the game. So it's great to hear that that's something that is certainly in focus. I want to ask as well about how the game is in regional Australia. From what I know, it's not a sport which is super popular regionally, and obviously, with your background working in football in Victoria, I'm sure you know that footy in regional Australia is pretty much king. So is that an area that you're looking to grow the game in regional Australia?
Yeah, you're spot on there, Dan. And I think, again, just with my experience in the AFL, regional it's the lifeline and the lifeblood of those communities. And you know, that's what, brings that community together. And I just came back from Darwin a couple of weeks ago, and softball used to be absolutely massive up there, and it's slowly diminished, and we're, you know, investing a fair bit there to get a full-time resource to really build participation back up again. And, you know, I look at some of the stats and look at the history of softball, and the numbers are massive across the country, whether that was metro or regional. So softball has actually been, you know, a sport that's done really, really well for a long time, but it's competing against, you know, obviously larger sports now that's got bigger money, bigger media opportunities. So the regionals is what needs the support from us. And I reflect a little bit about Victoria, not that I want to be Victoria focused, it's just that it had recent funding from Vic Health in relation to a program out in the Gippsland area. And it just goes to prove that when we can put people on the ground, and Gippsland has been massive in softball, but through a generation that those numbers have really, dwindled down, and that resource has been put into that area. And straight away, it had an immediate impact, having that resource there, and just the impact it's made on that community. I just got, you know, the hairs on the back of my hand just tingled as I heard the staff tell me how important that funding was and how it's now impacted that area. So we build those clubs to start to bring those juniors in, and again, softball gets reignited into a regional setting of Victoria, where it's, you know, literally 2.5 hours drive from Melbourne. So, and then again in Darwin, same thing. Those opportunities, you know, Northern Territory is not a tiny little area; it's absolutely massive, and you know, and we're just looking at Darwin, but to get to Catherine and Alice, those are really big commitments to be able to get to that big space. But we know it has an impact, and it's got a really strong Indigenous background with softball there, and hence the reason that we're looking at every angle with participation, and probably the non-traditional. So, you know, going back to our Indigenous population, where it's been very popular, but also looking at diversity, equity and inclusion, and looking at the non-traditional communities to introduce them to the sport. So those, to me, are the opportunities, Dan, and we're really excited about it too.
Rightfully so. There's a lot of great opportunities there, and it seems like you and your team are leaving no stone unturned in getting people into the sport and growing the game nationwide. I want to ask you about the men's side of the game as well. Like you said, we have a really good men's team, which I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware of. And with the baseball/softball announcement for the Olympics, I'm curious about both women in baseball and men in softball, because it seems like they're being left out a little bit. So how's the men's side of softball in Australia, and how hard is it to try and grow the game when the Olympic goal isn't there for them, but it is there for the women?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I've got to tell you, Dan, in all the sports I've done, it's traditional male sports that I've come into. So, like the AFL in 2016 when I started, the CEO made the announcement, Gil McLaughlin, literally a month after I started, that the AFLW was going to start, and it was literally 4,000 girls started in our league in the next 18 months. So this is the first time in my 35 years I've actually entered a gender-positive sport where it's actually a female sport that now has, a men's competition, which is, completely amazing. It's a fraction under, 25,000 players that we've got, with 6,500 being boys or men. So that, to me, that's as inclusive as you're going to get when it's been gender specific in one area, and then you've got the other gender coming in, and there's those opportunities. And like you say, our men's team, the Steelers, have done really well. They're the world champions, and we've just forgotten about that. And that just only happened in December last year, and I was really lucky. I got to take that cup on a bit of a tour and dropped it off in Canberra in my first couple of weeks, and that's a beautiful trophy, by the way. And there's a top competition, Oceania, happening. Literally, our men's team and women's team, so our men's under 18 are off to Mexico and Samoa, as is our under 18 women's squad to Samoa from, heading off from this Friday. And, we wish them all the very best. And, again, that's being the under 18 team just really helps us grow the sport when we can have those great performances on an international stage. But the opportunities are there for boys. I do look, I'm learning about baseball as well, and obviously baseball really is for the men's in the Olympics. There is no women's squad, and then the reverse happens in softball, where it's a female sport or a women's sport in the Olympics, but the men don't get a Guernsey in the Olympics.
It's interesting. I can't really think of any other sports that are sort of gendered and split up like that. The closest I can think of would really be sort of basketball for men, netball for women, but obviously we have very successful women's basketball teams. So do America, who are the basketball superpower of the world. But yeah, that's about the closest I can think of. Yeah,
no men's netball team. So
yes, of course.
These interesting anomalies, and I don't make those rules at the high level in the Olympics, but I think from our level at grassroots, and even here at our elite performance, we can see that there are men's competitions that provide our young junior boys right through to the men's team opportunities to still represent their country. It may not be at the highest level at Olympics, but it's still World Championships. It's pretty good news.
It's very good news, and it seems like all the news for softball in Australia is heading in the direction of good news as well. It sounds like everything that you're implementing is really, really positive so far, which is great to hear. And just before you go, Sarah, I've asked you a lot about the Olympics in 5 years and the 5-year plan and the sort of long-term goals, but what's going on in softball around Australia in the short term? Is there anything exciting happening over the next sort of few months leading up to that tournament right before the 2024 Olympics?
Yeah, again, we've got a whole preparation for that, and again we look at 2032 as well. So having that breakdown of the high performance plan is, again, they're really the exciting things. But again, the World Cup in Italy next year in July. Again, 5 days before the biggest world stage of the Paris Olympics. If we can do well there, it puts us on the map, and that really helps with grassroots participation. But for me, my staff and across the country, uniting the country in a focus of grassroots participation, we just really need to introduce young kids to the sport so that they love it, because once a kid picks up a bat and a ball and a glove and actually have that opportunity to hit that ball and having that feeling, there's no greater sport going around, and the way it unites in a small team in communities is absolutely amazing. I've seen it for myself because I've nearly finished the whole country going around, And when I watch those little kids play, and they have this amazing love of the game all the way through. And again, I was lucky enough in your beautiful city a few weeks ago to be at the Masters game, and seeing, you know, people up to 65, 70 years old still hitting those balls out of the ballpark and how quick they can run. This is a sport that's cradle to grave, Dan, and that's what I love.
Sarah, it's been great chatting to you. I can hear you've got a massive amount of passion for softball and you're doing a great job in your first 10 weeks as CEO, and I'm really excited to see where you take things over the next few years for however long you're in the role, but it seems like everything's going in a very, very positive direction. Really appreciate your time chatting to me and to our Flow FM audience today, and hopefully we can have you on again sometime because, like you said, there's a lot of exciting things happening in softball at the moment.
It was my pleasure, and anytime, Dan.